Anthem. If you're watching this, chances are you're already well aware of what Anthem is, so I don't need to get into its development history, or the things it promised in previews that aren't in the final product, or the lackluster ad campaign. You can look elsewhere for all that jazz. But here are the basics, just to get you up to speed. Anthem is a looter shooter developed by BioWare, which is famous for its classics such as Knights of the Old Republic, the Mass Effect series, the Dragon Age series, and their old Dungeons & Dragons games. It was published by Electronic Arts, which is famous for being voted the worst company in America 2 years in a row by readers, including me, of The Consumerist. Anthem was released worldwide on the 22nd of February in 2019, though you got to play it early on PC if you located the baby teeth of your father's great uncle and faxed a photocopy of them to the United States Postmaster General. It was the best-selling game of the month of February, although that is semi-meaningless because it's February and not much else comes out in February, but still. A lot of people bought Anthem, myself obviously included. In presentation and execution, Anthem was clearly intended to be BioWare's, or to be honest, EA's, Destiny killer. As such, it borrows some elements from Destiny. I don't mean this in a bad way. I'm not saying Anthem is stealing, or cheating, or even outright copying. If you want to be a direct competitor to something, it makes sense to be similar to that thing in enough ways that people switching over find some familiar touchstones to latch onto. Destiny has light levels, Anthem has power levels, Destiny has the Scrapper, the Tank, and the Mage. Anthem has the Scrapper, the Tank, and the Mage. Destiny 1 has non-respawn darkness zones, Destiny 2 has non-respawn respawn restricted zones, Anthem has non-respawn respawn restricted areas, etc. Destiny's item tiers are white, green, blue, purple, yellow. Anthem's item tiers are white, green, blue, purple, gold, yellow. The reason these comparisons are especially funny is because allegedly bringing up this blatantly obvious fact was verboten over at BioWare. You're not fooling anyone, guys. Because of this deliberate setup by EA/BioWare that Anthem would be better than, or at least a viable alternative to, Destiny, it feels fair to directly compare the three, Destiny 1 and 2 versus Anthem, and directly contrast the many ways that one may be better than the other. Destiny 2 will be used as a comparison more than Destiny 1, naturally, but when it makes sense to use both, I will. In order to make this definitely too long video a little more palatable, I have broken up these sections into discrete bits. If you're not interested in a particular element, or you're specifically looking for a particular comparative factor, these sections are timestamped in the description below. Please take a moment at this time to be utterly horrified by the length of this video that absolutely nobody asked me to make. Okay, let's actually get started. Part 1. Your character's appearance. Subsection 1A. Player character customization.
Shepard did everything right. More than we could have hoped for.
Commander Shepard uncovered the truth.
BioWare is legendary for their stories. Their characters are full-fledged human beings, their stories are epic in scale, and your player character just feels real. You can really feel, thanks to BioWare's always improving character creator, as if an avatar of yourself really is plotting the genocide of the Pyjaks or getting lost in the hinterlands for the 4th week in a row. Anthem is, unfortunately, not one of those games. But neither is Destiny. These games both miss the mark in different ways here, but let's start with the character creator. All three games have a creator that's pretty bare bones. Destiny 1 and 2's are basically identical to one another, and then Anthem's is the worst of the bunch. Destiny lets you choose your species from one of 3, gives you a handful of face shapes and various other options, hair, eyes, some sort of face paint, and sends you on your way. Anthem lets you pick a person. That's it. No changing the skin tone, the eye color, the hairstyle, or the hair color. And with no opportunity to see this player model in the game until several hours into the story, if you find that, maybe, the way the lighting works makes the model you chose look jaundiced and grotesque, well, tough titties. The way Anthem rationalizes this decision is by reassuring you that the only person who will ever see your player model is you, which honestly sounds as if they're embarrassed by these models, and you should be too. Don't worry. No one will see the horrible mistake you made when you misjudged the lighting and picked a model you now know you'll never consider to be your player avatar in this world. We won't tell anyone if you don't. I really didn't think BioWare could or would do worse than Andromeda's absolutely garbage character creator, but here we are. Destiny 1 and 2 win this round. It's not a super robust character creator, sure, But when you're walking around player hubs with your helmet off, the likelihood that you'll see another player character with the exact same head and features as you is pretty damn low. In Anthem, if there were a place in the game to interact with other players outside of your suit, the chance would be 1 in 21 per sex. Bad job, BioWare. BioWare 0, Bungie 1. Subsection 1B, Suit/Armor Customization. Now, Anthem's whole conceit around this was that everyone, including you, is going to see your javelin all the time, and your model never, or almost never. And that's true. They claimed that your javelin was going to be disgustingly customizable, and it is, at least as far as colors go. In Destiny 1, you have access to a buttload of shaders, but they apply to your entire armor set, and you can't decide which parts are, for example, black versus neon blue. In Destiny 2, you can apply shaders to individual armor pieces as well as to your weapons, but the shaders are now consumables, which don't even get me fucking started on that. And, naturally, some are locked off behind events, or tasks, or whatever. Several shaders in Destiny 1 are locked behind events and tasks as well, but they're infinite use, and therein lies the key difference that makes Destiny 1's system good, and Destiny 2's system bad. Either way, you still can't decide which colors go where on the piece you applied the shader to, just which part of your body the pre-decided colors end up on. Anthem does have the leg up here. You have to buy, either with earned in-game gold or with purchased shards, different armors, but they're entirely cosmetic, so what you're changing is the shape of things, not their function. Finally, a game where you don't have to debate whether switching out a piece of armor is worth it because the new one is stronger, but the old one just looks cooler. But the colors? Well, you have the entire rainbow available to you from the start. And while there aren't as many discrete sections you can change the colors of as I would like, I think it still allows for an astounding amount of aesthetic customization. Thankfully, nothing cosmetic is consumable in Anthem, so you don't have to worry about running out of bright blue paint and heading out looking like only half of a poison dart frog, as opposed to a whole one. Just as a nitpick, I will say that the decals and vinyls are almost all terrible, and also that my opinion on this would be 100% reversed if the vinyls were as color customizable as the rest of the suit. Unfortunately, they are not color customizable in any way. Throwing this cornflower blue vinyl over nearly any of my color schemes? Ugly, 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 ugly. But if I could color it with the same wheel as the suit...
Baller, groovy, baby! Super sassy, sexy!
Because beauty is in the eye of the beholder and all that, it's genuinely hard to say which of these two customization systems is better. They're kind of equally good and bad, just in different ways. While I personally find that the Anthem version allows for far more personality, and it is the system that I prefer, I'll call this one a draw and award no points to either. Though I will go on the record here and say that changing shaders from non-consumable in Destiny 1 to consumable in Destiny 2, regardless of whatever bullshit excuse they gave was, is the most obvious cash grab I've ever fucking seen, and whoever came up with that idea, whether at Bungie or at Activision, needs to have their ass kicked. Part 2. The story.
We live in a dangerous world.
If you don't care about the stories of these games because you're just here to play them, and your primary focus is on how the games actually play, that's fair. Skip to this timestamp in the video to bypass my exceedingly long rant about story and player choice, and get into the gameplay itself, the UI, all that quality of life stuff. Let me start out here by saying that I won't be getting into the DLC story expansions. Everyone knows Destiny 1 was a mess in pretty much every way until the Year 2 overhaul, and the story was bare bones and meaningless until the Taken King, which was far better than anything that it had done up to that point. Comparing Anthem, which is not just in its first year but in its first few months, to a game that was widely considered to be a completely different and much better game after its first year, would be both unfair and disingenuous. Destiny 1's core story is infamously terrible. Nothing gets explained, except when it's explained that explaining it to you would be too hard. And I'm busy. You allegedly do something important and change things in some way, but it all seems kind of intangible. The world state doesn't change in any perceptible way, beyond the fact that you have more locations available to you at the end than you did at the beginning. This is even true after you've played Destiny 1's story to its conclusion. Nothing in any area simultaneously accessible by other players ever changes, except when, there's a Christmas event, so they put in snow, or there's a Halloween event, so they put in candles, that kind of thing. From a meta perspective, obviously this does make sense. You can't have 20 different versions of each hub area for each player depending on where they are in the story or whether they took Route A or Route B. Either they have access to the area or they don't, and that's the only difference. Destiny 2's core story is, if you can believe it, even worse. Obviously this is like just my opinion, man, but really, it's bad. Especially considering how much they hyped it up. I'll be spoiling it soon, so if you don't want to know the elements of a robust story that lasts for 16 forgettable missions and ends with all the impact of a wet fart, skip ahead at the point where I do the pre-spoilers countdown. Anyone who took any English classes at really any level of education beyond elementary school should be familiar with the idea of the dramatic structure. This is most commonly displayed as what's called Freytag's pyramid, which looks like this. Now, it's not the mandatory blueprint for stories we were told it was growing up, but it remains a useful blueprint even so, and you'll find that the vast majority of stories still told today, especially those about the hero's journey, do follow the dramatic structure to some extent. Exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, denouement. It's not a specifically listed part of the dramatic structure, but what we call the inciting incident happens right here, and it's what propels the story into the rising action. As a refresher, and for those of you who never came across this particular cornerstone in your education, this is how it goes. The Rancho Carne Toros are the best high school cheerleading squad in the country. Their captain is an outgoing senior, and incoming senior Kirsten Dunst is taking her place. New squad member Eliza Dushku reveals to Kirsten that all of their cheers were stolen from Gabriella Union's cheer squad, the East Compton Clovers. After being humiliated by the Clovers at a home game, they have to come up with a new routine to perform at regionals and nationals. Desperate, they hire a choreographer to teach them a new routine. They discover he taught this routine to other squads and are humiliated at regionals. They throw themselves into making up their first actual original routine to use at nationals, and, hopefully, earn back their respectability and another, but their first earned, first place trophy. They compete at nationals against many squads, but primarily against the Clovers, present at nationals for the first time. Kirsten and Gabrielle, now having come to an understanding, bury the hatchet and congratulate their squads on their efforts. Kirsten gets the guy, Eliza resigns herself to being the best friend in love with her best friend who's in love with her brother for the rest of her life. To show there are no hard feelings, everyone participates in a dance sequence. Destiny 2's story, if we can even call it that, hits these marks as if it's in a hurry to get them out of the way. You're almost shooed along to the climax, rushing to get you back to the comfortable Destiny 1 status quo. If you don't want to get spoiled, skip to this timestamp now. Ready? 3, 2, 1. All of Destiny 1. TLDR is that you're an immortal space magic soldier with resurrection powers provided by a golf ball called the Traveler, and you've had some miscellaneous adventures. You're totally the best, and everyone loves you. Darth Malgus on steroids rolls up to your home base, puts a gimp suit on the Traveler, depowers all the formerly immortal guardians including you, kills a bunch of them, and kicks everyone out of the tower. You crawl out of the city and find a shard of the Traveler, restoring your light and immortality. You visit various celestial bodies to collect the Vanguard bosses Zavala, Ikora, and Cade, as well as a couple other new allies, to find a way onto Malgus' ship to kill him and free the Traveler. You and the Vanguard run through the city to assault the ship. You make it aboard, you defeat Malgus. He becomes a giant light/lava monster, the Traveler wakes up for the first time in hundreds of years, frees itself from its gimp suit, and melts him. Pulses from this explosion go all the way out into dark space, where it wakes up the Triangular Reapers. Everyone looks wistfully off into the sky, thinking about all the nameless but totally important characters that died in this conflict. Note, gentle listener, that the only named character from Destiny 1 that dies in Destiny 2's main story is the entirely inconsequential speaker. All the other mentioned deaths are other nameless and lightless guardians, but of course not you, because you're the special one who got your light back. Never mind all these other yahoos also running around in every area you visit or even accompanying you on missions. In a denouement, the expectation is that calm is restored and the story's participants are changed people. The Vanguard tells you they've each been changed by the experience, but considering their static portrayals both before and now, this is a case where they're telling us and not showing us. Zavala says the Vanguard needs to be less rigid and more chill and protect more than just the city, despite the fact that his participation in Destiny 1's plot was to stand right here and be gruff while you jetted around the galaxy. Ikora says she's like extra spiritual now or whatever, which doesn't count as a change because her entire role in Destiny 1 was to stand right here and be the superficial facsimile of Zoe to Cade's superficial facsimile of Malcolm. And Cade says nothing of import at all, or indicates he's been changed in any way, because his entire character is a joke, and everything he says is a joke, and he's so irreverent. Don't you just love him? He cares about things, but he's too cool to admit it! The sequel hook happens back up there in the climax, rather than here during the denouement. Basically, the status quo as far as the player is concerned is back as it was in Destiny 1, and almost nothing is different. The Guardians are still immortal, the Vanguard is still headquartered in the new open floor plan tower, all the Darkness factions from Destiny 1 are the exact same threat. The same NPCs, except Eris Morn, who's busy being actually interesting somewhere off-screen, are still doing their exact same thing, and you're doing the same stuff you were doing in Destiny 1 but with an upgraded texture pack. Basically, Destiny 2's story amounts to this. Your comfortable Destiny 1 endgame life is destroyed by a new enemy, including the convenient loss of both your equipment and your abilities. You get your space magic back via MacGuffin and collect your allies back from wherever, making a few new ones along the way. You defeat the big bad, everything goes back to the way it was except the speaker's dead, the only interesting person in the tower is busy elsewhere, the tower is even more annoying to navigate, Eva Levante is now out of a job because of capitalism, and factions are now stupid and even more useless than before. Also, for some reason, all the cool locations you could visit before on various celestial bodies are now gone, replaced with usually less interesting spaces. Anthem's story surely isn't going to win any awards, but the base story alone is more interesting and emotionally engaging than what Destiny 2 pulled off, and it did that without Destiny's benefit of an existing world and cast of characters that it wrongly assumed it had made you care about. Keep in mind that the primary reason Anthem's story feels like a letdown is because it comes from BioWare, a studio well known for its strong storytelling. A story with the amount of player choice that one has come to expect from a BioWare game just isn't really feasible in a shared world shooter, because if BioWare had allowed for player choice to such a degree that huge parts of the universe were different or even inaccessible, then people would be upset more than they'd be pleased. Looter shooters are inherently a time sink, so forcing someone to start over entirely because they made one wrong choice 6 hours ago that, unbeknownst to them at the time, locked them out of a cool area, BioWare would have been eviscerated. I mean, they were eviscerated anyway, and not completely unreasonably, but the lack of player choice on the scale of other BioWare games is something that no one should have been surprised by. The first thing you should know is that Anthem's story has a slight swerve. It's not a huge one as far as swerves go, and it's not unpredictable or impossible or even really hard to see coming, but it is there. Destiny 2's story is irritating largely because it's entirely predictable. Nothing happens that isn't obvious from a mile away, no one dies that wasn't a foregone conclusion, and nothing changes that wasn't expected. Anthem's story has its own predictabilities, but things go in a less obvious direction and end with a world state that's more different at its conclusion than Destiny 2's endpoint was from Destiny 1's endpoint. Let's go through the pyramid. I'm gonna spoil Anthem's story beats now, so if you don't want to know the story ahead of time, skip to this point in the video. Ready? 3, 2, 1. In your prologue mission, you're a rookie living in the golden age of freelancers. They're cool, they're popular, they're a force to be reckoned with. Halleck, the leader of your group and the best and badassest freelancer around, is taking a bunch of you into a violently unstable part of the world to turn off a magic MacGuffin that's fucking shit up. This mission goes poorly, nearly everyone dies, you drag Halleck out of it against his will, and he hates you for this. It's now a couple years later. After that disaster, freelancers are considered unreliable relics of a bygone age. You're one of very few still operating, scraping by for food and maintenance money. You get recruited by a shady government organization to work for them, eventually coming across a big man called the Monitor. He wants to get back to the magic MacGuffin from the prologue and use it to rule the world as a benevolent dictator, but to get there safely he needs a suit MacGuffin to protect him from the danger it creates. You and your mission control guy Owen race to get the suit MacGuffin first. Owen whines constantly that he's stuck back at base while you fly around. You make contact with Halleck and your old mission control gal Faye to enlist their reluctant help. Owen gets in a suit for the first time during an ambush to try and help, and almost gets killed. Faye takes over as your mission control because she and Halleck were already working on finding the suit MacGuffin that you're looking for. Owen is predictably annoyed. You find the suit, Owen betrays you and steals it to go give it to the Monitor because he's a smart guy. The Monitor is predictably a bad boss, but Owen feels bad, so he gives you the part of the suit MacGuffin that you need to safely approach the magic MacGuffin, and he leaves for DLC pastures. You fight your way to the Monitor, who is transformed into a Devil May Cry boss, and shoot him until he falls over. Halleck kills him via vehicular homicide. Faye shuts down the magic MacGuffin and manages to not go crazy doing it. You retire to the home base for drinks and pats on the back. Everyone's glad you saved the world. Halleck is back in action and also your friend again. Freelancers are back on the map as a force for good. A post-credits sequence drops the sequel hook, hinting at the reappearance of an Abe sapien species that humanity used to be enslaved by way before the prologue. In the Anthem world, the story changes things. Also, because Anthem's primary hub area is not a multiplayer area, BioWare had the freedom to make changes to this area as the story progressed and as the player interacted with NPCs. None of these changes are huge on their own, but compared to the entirely static world of Destiny, even these minuscule for a BioWare game changes make Anthem's setting feel alive and lived in. In Destiny, your one-on-one interaction with NPCs is entirely on the surface, particularly considering that your player character in Destiny 1 is unvoiced outside of cutscenes, and in Destiny 2 is unvoiced entirely. You never speak with any of these characters. They talk at you and around you like you're a prop, which you kind of are as far as these conversations go. Having a silent protagonist is far from a bad thing, but in Destiny's case, it doesn't help me feel immersed in the world or the character the way it does in, for example, Half-Life 2. The NPCs in Anthem are people, with personalities, with likes and dislikes, with arcs. Destiny's NPCs are furniture. In Destiny, no one in any of these hub areas changes or even moves around for basically the entirety of the story. In Anthem, after you recruit Halleck and Faye, they appear in Fort Tarsis. Once Spoiler does the spoiler thing and leaves, they leave the fort and never come back. Story NPCs and random characters come and go as you continue on, and several of these characters have little mini-stories that your choices actually do impact. The world overall doesn't change because other players have to inhabit it too, but the impact you have on these mini-stories in Fort Tarsis is more player agency than Destiny has ever given you, and it goes a long way. Your dialogue choices do basically amount to say the nice thing or say the mean thing, be glib or be serious, use heart or use brain, but at least you get something to say at all. You get to participate. The fact that these NPCs interact with you beyond spouting some random line and opening up their shop does wonders for helping you feel like you live here, among these people, rather than feeling like a set piece that goes around and stares at other set pieces. As a final note for this section, I'd like to add this. Both Anthem and Destiny have a huge amount of lore and world building that is largely not addressed in universe outside of codex entries. In Anthem, the codex is called the Cortex, and it works basically the same way it did in Mass Effect and Dragon Age. Stuff about the setting, and some short little vignettes to help you feel immersed. In Destiny 1, the codex is called the Grimoire, and it was mostly the same. Some world building and some short stories. Those short stories were the rule rather than the exception here. But not only do you have to earn Grimoire entries, called cards, but there was literally no way, at all, to read Grimoire entries in the game. And there still isn't. If you had the official Destiny companion app, which was otherwise useful primarily because it lets you swap weapons out of your vault onto your character even in the middle of a mission, then you could read your cards there from within the app. You also used to be able to read the cards you'd unlocked on Bungie's official website, which Destiny 1 to this day still directs you to visit when you unlock a card, but... When Destiny 2 came out, the app was upgraded into the Destiny 2 companion app. This update removed the Grimoire cards entirely. They've been uploaded online in various places by fans who recognize that Bungie could not possibly have screwed that up any worse, but the fact that you have to go to third-party resources to learn about the game world is a pretty fucking bad look. Destiny 2, as usual, does a somehow worse job with this. The Grimoire is done away with entirely, explaining its absence from the companion app. So instead of earning Grimoire cards that you had to download an external app to read, cards that you now have to navigate to third-party websites to read, players can access the Destiny Codex by... Yeah, there isn't one. There's a lore section here, but A, you still have to unlock these entries, B, you are not told in-game how to unlock them, and C, because of that, I, as you can see, obviously have no idea what they say. As with the Grimoire, these are thankfully also available on third-party sites, which also tell you how to unlock them, but I really don't understand the goal behind hiding your world building so thoroughly like this. Are you embarrassed to have a story in your game, Bungie? Honestly, considering the fact that Joe Staten and his staff have been working on a Destiny story for years before the game came out, and then you arbitrarily decided to throw that out about 10 minutes before the game launched, which led to Joe Staten leaving Bungie under, let's say, acrimonious circumstances, I'm gonna go ahead and say yes. If you want to know more about the world, especially if you're a new player who didn't have Destiny 1 and thus aren't even aware of the Grimoire, well, you better start making shit up, because Bungie sure as hell isn't going to give it to you beyond maybe stowing some tiny tidbits away in item descriptions or lore entries that it doesn't tell you how to unlock. Why are the Hive super into worms and dead stuff and consuming everything? If you're a fresh Destiny 2 player, your best bet is basically just to believe that the Hive are the Flood, and the Fallen are the Covenant, and continue on your way. The Hive are actually compelled by an ancient pact made with worm gods from below the surface of their home planet Fundament to constantly consume and destroy and generally act as slaves to their strongest base instincts. If they let up in this fanatical rush toward destruction and power for even a moment, they themselves will be consumed by the worm larvae that give them the power they use to cause all this chaos. Have fun figuring that out on your own, without leaving the game to delve into supplementary materials and fan wikis. In Anthem, you can access the Codex by navigating to it in your menu. Entries are created and expanded as you get through the game, and you can find extra parts lying around in Fort Tarsis as well as in the open world, but large sections of it are available to you from the moment you start the game, and none of it is locked behind the kinds of skill challenges that Destiny 1 requires of you. If you happen to not like PvP, for example, and you aren't aware of the third-party sites hosting the Grimoire in its entirety, then I guess you just don't get to read the Grimoire cards that are locked behind acquiring actual thousands of PvP kills. Lucky you. You ask the question, what's up with the Hive? And Destiny gives you no easy way to learn the answer to that question. In Destiny 2, it basically gives you no way at all. You ask the question, what's up with the Scars? And you navigate over to the Library tab in your menu, and you read about them. Turns out they're insects that mimic the dominant life form in an area, having appeared suddenly when a magic MacGuffin from a long time ago created them out of nothing, as these magic MacGuffins are wont to do. Huh. Neither of these games have a story that's going to change your life, but in my opinion, Anthem's story is just better than Destiny's. Its story feels more dynamic, more like a story you live in rather than just play in. It offers more opportunities for genuine emotional involvement, and its characters change and develop over time. Destiny always returns to the status quo at the end, while Anthem is at least allowed the small freedom of changing the parts of your world that other players don't see to demonstrate that the story's events have changed things permanently. Destiny has an enormous amount of amazing and deep lore that in Destiny 1 you needed an app to access, and that in Destiny 2 barely exists. Anthem's lore is accessible from within the game just by opening up the menu. Short as it was, I quite like Anthem's story, and I'm interested to experience more of the plot in this world. I can't say I've ever felt that in Destiny while playing. All the interesting stuff is buried in places that you have to leave the game to find. Bad job, Bungie. BioWare 1, Bungie 1. Part 3. Your place in the game's world.
This is why we were led here. I haven't been as close to the Traveler's Light since... Do you feel it? Hold on to your helmet. Do you feel it? The light is back. We're back. Eyes out, Guardian.
Both Destiny and Anthem are in the strange situation of setting you up as a lone savior while also deliberately placing you in a world where you're intended to play with your friends. In Destiny 1, this is easily explained. You're explicitly said to be one of many Guardians, so it's not weird that other Guardians are hanging around in the hub areas, or accompanying you on strikes, or raids, or generally just moseying around the various planets you can visit. Destiny 2 screws this up immediately. Darth Malgus shows up, kicks everyone out of town, and steals your superpowers. I'm pretty sure it's explicitly said that you're the only Guardian who gets your superpowers back for the majority of the plot, until everyone else also regains them at the conclusion of the main story. The Vanguard are counting on you to do everything because you're the only one who can't die, as the only person with access to the light. So... who are all these other guys? Until you beat the main story, there are supposed to be no, or at least very few other active Guardians. So seeing other people dying and rezzing just as easily as you the second you show up to a shared area does no favors for your sense of immersion. It's evident as soon as you step out into the exclusion zone that Bungie were very in favor of gameplay versus story segregation here. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing from a gameplay standpoint, but it really doesn't help you feel like you're the lone savior that the plot sets you up as. It's clear that you're just one of many. You go through all the actual story missions completely solo unless you specifically invite others to join you, and that does help your sense of isolation to a point. But you're often still traversing these heavily populated shared areas on the way to your solo spaces, so playing solo can really only mitigate so much. Anthem does a much better job of this. Unlike Destiny 2, you're not made out to be the only freelancer out there. You even meet a handful of others during the story. You're one of a few, not the only one left. Because the hub world is a solo area, you're never going to run into other players here, so already Anthem has the leg up in that respect. When you venture out into the open world, there will be a maximum of 3 other players out there with you, and it's a large enough space that you may never actually come across them. Unless you go into the launch bay, which I don't know why you would do because it's an obvious afterthought and a hilariously buggy disaster, then you will never see more than 3 other freelancers at the same time. This really does make you feel like you're a member of a very small club. You're not seeing a dozen other freelancers while you go about your business. You might not even see any at all. When you start a mission and it pops you somewhere out in the open world, it's an isolated instance that doesn't have other players in it, rather than having you go through a shared area with other players in it before getting to your solo space. Anthem throws a hissy fit if you launch these missions solo, but you can, and you should. The added difficulty in completing the whole story entirely by yourself really does help you feel like you're the lone savior the story makes you out to be. You're not the only freelancer, but you are the one who happened to save the world. Stronger together, sure, but more immersed alone, you know? Good job, BioWare. BioWare 2, Bungie 1. Part 4. Non-player characters.
Okay, please don't hate me, but that link? The one you...
got elbow deep in Ur-6 for?
More like wrist deep, but yeah. It didn't have all the intel I needed.
In short, Destiny NPCs are props, and Anthem NPCs are people. I touched on this in Part 2, but this is where having a silent protagonist really does Destiny no good. Even having unvoiced dialogue choices you could select from, even if they were no better than Anthem's system of be fun or be serious, even that would make the NPCs feel more alive when it comes to how they interact, or in Destiny's case how they don't, with the player character. When you interact with a named NPC in Destiny, you have two options for what happens. Either they ignore you, or they operate as a storefront. They might say something like, "Good to see you again," but that's it. They're dolls that say something when you pull their string. They don't talk to you, and you don't talk to them. When you interact with a named NPC in Anthem, you have a conversation with them. These conversations can often go one of two ways depending on what you say, and with many of them, once you've completed their little story arc, they disappear from the game world. Boom! You can A. Interact with NPCs, B. In a way that changes the game world at all, and C. Through these interactions, you can develop your character's relationship to them. You can't take anybody to the Bone Zone, at least not yet, but you can at least feel as if you developed friendships or rivalries somewhat organically, rather than as a mute automaton that's just along for the ride. The NPCs in Destiny aren't terrible, but by and large, they're not great either. They just don't have enough personality to be good. They're not characters, they're caricatures. Cade is the id, Zavala is the ego, Ikora is the superego. The speaker is that feeling you get when you leave a boring conversation with a new person and realize you've immediately forgotten everything up to and including what they looked like. Amanda Holiday is a wrench wench from Space Alabama. Sloan is a loyal soldier. Devrim is a sassy sniper. Asher is a codgy old man. Shax is a battle lord. Soraya is a loner who resents the system. Tess Everest is capitalism. The closest you come to having an arc with any of these characters is that Soraya and Asher don't like you at first. Then after progressing through their quest lines, Soraya likes you, and Asher dislikes you less but won't admit it. They don't have arcs that you can actively participate in, or even really witness. Soraya gets labeled a guardian by the Vanguard after you beat the game, despite not having the light, but you had nothing to do with that, and it changes nothing except that she now also hangs out in the tower. Besides Cade, by whom I am irritated, and Eris, to whom I am married, the characters in Destiny just aren't fleshed out enough to really care about. If Ikora had exploded at the beginning of the game when she ripped ass into that ship like a boss, I would have been bummed because, I mean, she didn't deserve that, and Gina Torres is a badass who I'm always glad to see working, but that bummer wouldn't have stuck with me for longer than a few minutes. The NPCs in Anthem are, even in their brief appearances, people. I feel things about these guys, whether it's positive or negative. They have arcs, they have personalities. I'm sure BioWare didn't intend for me to dislike Matthias and hope his organs eventually liquefy permanently, but I do, and that reaction alone is more than I felt for literally any Destiny character. These characters have enough personality to garner an emotional reaction from me, whether positive or negative. If Zavala turned evil in some upcoming DLC, I can't see myself really caring one way or the other.
Real quick Anthem spoiler coming up. Skip here to go past it. 3, 2, 1.
I found Owen fun enough at the beginning, but he quickly grew to be someone I considered smarmy and irritating even before his betrayal, and I was actually glad to see him leave the main story permanently. Despite the fact that Faye was only your mission control for the prologue mission, having her voice back in my head when she took over from Owen just felt right. Full disclosure, I'm willing to admit that the feeling of rightness towards Faye's guidance over Owen's may be influenced by the fact that I put a hefty number of hours into both the VIP demo and the public demo, and those took place during a set of missions that happen after Faye has taken over mission control duties from Owen, but before his betrayal. In addition to story-related NPCs, where Anthem already has the obvious advantage, there's also a large cast of NPCs with whom you interact in Fort Tarsis, and their little story arcs can range from genuinely funny to genuinely sad. There's a visiting sailor in town searching for his brother. Your interactions with him begin as being framed around games of bullshit, where one of you makes a claim about yourselves and the other has to determine whether it's true or false. One of his claims is about a 10-hour-long battle he fought against a sea creature out on the ocean, diving beneath the seas to cool off his javelin so he could stay aloft during the fight. During your conversations, he reveals that a sailor's javelin is tethered to the ship to force them to stay and fight rather than fly away and abandon the others during a battle. From just those 2 lines of dialogue, I got a more vivid mental image of the Anthem world and the types of people who live within it than I could ever get from... well...
Looking for something?
I can picture myself in my javelin, chained to a boat I'm defending, lobbing lightning bolt after lightning bolt at some giant sea creature, submerging myself to reset my floating time in between strikes. I don't just imagine it, I want to play that. I get that rush of adrenaline immediately followed by disappointment that comes from imagining something that awesome, imagining yourself right there, and then remembering that you're some schmo on your sofa playing a video game and Iron Man suits don't actually exist. On the other end of the spectrum, there's an old woman waiting for the return of her child. It becomes clear through these conversations that Merelda's memory is failing her, whether due to Alzheimer's or just old age. You learn through these conversations that she's been waiting for a very long time. Eventually, you infer that this woman's child is dead, and has been for years. Around the same time you learn this, her failing memory misidentifies you as this missing child. You can either play along or tell her flat out that she's wrong, but both paths are heartbreaking. Eventually, if you play along long enough, you can gently let her down and she realizes you're not her child. She thanks you for being kind to her and disappears from the game world, later sending you a letter that thanks you for your kindness to a confused old woman. I don't know how this resolves if you choose to be straight with her from the start, but man, I felt for this woman. I wanted to believe that I was her long-lost daughter, that all her waiting had been rewarded, and that we could hang out as some sort of proto-family. I could imagine a game state where she stayed right here, and you could talk to her as you came and went from missions, giving her a friend in this harsh world. She could tell you about her paintings, and about the family she now understands is dead. But no. Once her plotline is resolved, she disappears to go to a different city, and I miss her. I want her to be a part of my crew, part of my Inquisition, just present in the game world past her usefulness. I've never felt that for any Destiny character, and BioWare got me hooked on these characters in minutes, when Bungie hasn't been able to do it in years. Anthem has the grubby fingerprints of mismanagement all over it, but when it comes to these little touches, BioWare is right here, right where they excel, doing exactly what they excel at. And that's just 2 NPCs, not even ones that you ever have to interact with either. There's also my wife Brynn, and my pal Dax, and my mortal enemy Sumner, and my best friend Faye, and a whole cast of other major and minor characters that, to a man, each have more personality and development than all members of the Vanguard put together. I want these people to succeed. I want them to be happy. I want to sit down with Faye and marathon those radio plays that she loves so much. I want to bail Dax out of jail when she hip-checks Vool into a fountain for smooching her aunt. I want to barricade Matthias Plural behind a false wall in his office and leave him there forever. Anthem's world is full. You receive mail from people you've met and some you haven't. You get newsletters that have a little arc of their own. You get spam. There are several entire episodes of radio plays that you can listen to in the world.
Antium's elite lancers answer to no one except the Emperor himself.
Destiny just doesn't have anything like that. It has nothing like it. Populating a world full of characters of no consequence is just... it's a huge disappointment. There's a lot that Anthem got wrong. And we'll get there, I promise. But when it comes to the stories and the people they put in the world to tell those stories, there's a clear winner here. Great job, BioWare. BioWare 3, Bungie 1. Part 5. The Gameplay. Subsection 5A. Destiny classes versus Anthem classes. Oh hey, check it out! We're actually going to start playing the game now. If you skipped the last 6 hours of story and setting minutia to get here, I can't say I blame you. It's not the NPC interactions that they show off at E3, after all. Now, combat in both Destiny and Anthem feels fun and satisfying, but in very different ways, and for very different reasons. Bungie absolutely nailed the way an FPS should feel. No surprise considering their experiences with Halo. Gunplay in Destiny feels punchy, it feels solid. It's fun. Gunfire feels like it has an impact. Different classes of guns feel different, they sound different. These seem like obvious things, but they're important for two reasons. First, it feels notably better than the gunplay in Anthem, which itself has gunplay that doesn't feel bad, but definitely feels average. Second, it's kind of... I'm trying to think of a nicer way to say this, but I can't. All of Destiny's classes are the same. Obviously, this isn't true in an exact one-to-one sense, but let me show you what I mean. In Destiny, you have 3 classes and 3 further subclasses per class. Each subclass is tied to a particular element: solar, arc, and void. Basically fire, electricity, and poison magic. The 3 main classes are the Hunter, the Titan, and the Warlock. Their subclasses are, respectively, Gunslinger, Arcstrider, and Night Stalker, Striker, Sentinel, and Sunbreaker, Voidwalker, Dawnblade, and Stormcaller. Having so many subclasses does wonders for variability when it comes to supers. This much is true. But beyond the aesthetic differences of each class's appearance, and the minor differences each element's effects give to your abilities, the differences between them are, when compared to the differences between Anthem's javelins, pretty minimal. Don't get me wrong, they're still different enough that you can and will have a preference. Even a little difference matters when what you're selecting is a skill or feature that is exclusive to your class. But consider the melee attacks, for example. A Hunter's melee attack is a stab or a punch, a Titan's melee attack is a punch, and a Warlock's melee attack is a palm strike. But these differences are entirely for the aesthetic. Stabbing an enemy doesn't mean they take more damage than being punched or slapped. I'm not saying that having this aesthetic difference is bad, it's actually quite good, which is something that I'll get into in a minute. But it's only a difference in animation, not in execution. Here's a table I made of the primary non-aesthetic differences between each Destiny class. That's basically it, really. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, or that they're inherently identical and thus interchangeable because of this. What your supers do and how you use them, especially when using them in tandem with others, can change the entire tide of a battle if your skills are complementary to one another. Void damage can, properly set up in the skill tree, drain HP from enemies. Solar damage tends to do damage over time, and arc damage tends to chain between enemies. But you're not using your abilities as your primary damage source, because they have to cool down. You can stack your skills and equipment so that you can regain your abilities more quickly, or give them extra charges, but by and large, most of your moment-to-moment damage will come from your weapon loadout. Properly equipped and spec'd, a Titan, the closest Destiny has to a dedicated tank class, can be just as effective a sniper as a Hunter, the class clearly most intended to serve in that role. Properly equipped and spec'd, a Hunter can be just as effective a close-up damage eater and dealer as a Titan, the class clearly most intended to serve in that role. Every class can equip all the same weapon categories. There are specific weapons that are tied to particular classes, though these are rare. I might sound like I'm building up to an "and this is terrible because" point, but I actually think these are all good things, considering what kind of gameplay Destiny is going for. If only Titans could equip shotguns, and only Hunters could equip sniper rifles, and only Warlocks could equip, fusion rifles or whatever, that would be plainly absurd and extremely frustrating. Any reasoning given for these restrictions would be blatantly artificial and serve no purpose beyond deliberately preventing you from making your tank a sniper and your sniper a tank. All player characters are the same size and build, so telling a Titan player they can't equip a sniper rifle for any reason other than "we don't want you to" is a decision not reflected in the world the players exist in, which would make it bullshit. You see, in Destiny, your abilities are given to you by the light, which is space magic. Because of this, your abilities are considered to be innate. You have access to the Hunter tree, the Titan tree, or the Warlock tree, but never more than one, and you can't switch between them on a single character. Each of your classes is a completely separate character. Neither levels nor story progression are shared between any of them. If you main a Hunter and decide you want to give Warlock a try, you're starting completely over in the story, completely over in your level progression, and completely over with your equipment. Equipment is level locked, so while you can store a gun in your vault for your lower level character to retrieve, they still have to reach a minimum level or light level before they can equip it. Guns and ghost shells are interchangeable between classes, but all armor is class specific. Because testing out a different class means starting completely over, having the classes be more alike than they are different is a quality of life decision. And in Destiny's case, it was the right one. Nothing's stopping you from having 3 characters and leveling them all up concurrently besides time and effort, but I'd wager that most players have one main class and character that they focus on almost exclusively. If you're playing and you realize that a sniper rifle would be optimal for an upcoming encounter, you can just equip one. Imagine playing with friends in a situation where they need a sniper or a tank to fill out the fire team, but nobody has a Hunter or a Titan that's high level enough to participate. and no one can swap their equipment around to make it work because the roles are enforced rather than chosen. That version of Destiny would suck, and I'm glad it's not the one we got. In the version we got, everyone's playstyle and loadout will be different, sure, but all classes play similarly enough that they're more alike than they are different. It's how you execute that matters. Everyone basically starts with the same deck of cards, and you get to look at the whole thing and deal yourself what you consider to be an ideal hand. Anthem, just at a glance, is immediately different in a few key ways. You play in third person rather than first. Destiny gives you 3 weapons, but Anthem has 2 due to lacking a dedicated heavy weapon slot. Anthem gives you 4 skills over Destiny's 3, Destiny has 3 classes, Anthem has 4. And, of course, you can fly. I've got a lot more to say, but let me make this clear here and now. Flying? It's awesome. It looks great, it feels great, and I've never experienced anything quite like it. Especially not in a game that pegs itself as a shooter of any variety. But we'll get back to that later. In Anthem, your powers aren't space magic, they're technology. Sometimes that technology is based on MacGuffin artifacts that basically follow the any sufficiently advanced technology principle, and there are legit psychics in the world that function as your mission control, but your powers are tech nonetheless. You're not filled with capital L light that makes you an inherently magical person. You're just a normal person with specialized training stepping into an Iron Man suit. Because of this difference, Anthem does one key thing differently from Destiny. You have one character who can switch between suits at will as soon as you've unlocked them, and you can unlock them in any order you'd like. And that makes Anthem's class system a completely different beast. Because you're not forced to start completely over from square one when you want to try out a different javelin, Anthem has the freedom to make them all play vastly different from one another. And they did. The javelin you start the game in is called the Ranger. It's the suit you use in the prologue as well as in the first couple missions. Very early on in the game, this old and battered javelin is replaced with one fresh out of the box. Here you can decide to stick with the Ranger or pick one of the other 3, and it's this new javelin that you'll be limited to until you reach the levels required to unlock the others. The Ranger is a self-described jack-of-all-trades javelin. What this means in practice is that it's the one most likely, in my experience, to use standard firearms as its primary source of damage. You have a reasonably damaging melee attack, your dodging and jumping ability, second only to the Interceptor, makes you fairly adept at zipping around when necessary to prime or detonate a skill combo or set yourself up for ideal shot placement. You have access to a bubble shield for defense, plenty of variety in your skill loadout for offense, and your super functions just as well against several weaker targets as it does against one strong one. The Ranger is the javelin that comes the closest to playing like a pretty standard FPS class. Focus on guns, use your abilities to augment your gunplay to taste. If you decided to stay with the Ranger when you got your opportunity to pick a shiny new suit at the beginning of the game, I don't blame you. It's not the black sheep or anything, but it's the other 3 suits that really give Anthem's class variety a chance to shine. The Interceptor is the melee-focused javelin. Unlike the other 3 suits, its melee attack has no cooldown, allowing you to mash it, or, as of the Big March update, just hold it down, to use your little knives to slash over and over and over. You have a triple jump as well as a triple dodge, both of which allow you to change your direction between each step, and the sheer agility this gives you feels completely unlike anything you're likely to have experienced before in a game like this. Your abilities are best used to prime combos for your melee to trigger, to attack distant targets your melee can't reach as you close in, or to wear down the armor or shields of a difficult enemy. Your super locks you into using only melee attacks, but it makes them cut through armor and shields like butter. Great for when you're in a pinch against a resilient enemy, or surrounded by too many smaller ones. There are situations where you'll be relying on your firearms, of course. The enemy is too dangerous to fight up close, or is too far away, or your melee can't reach their weak spot and hitting them elsewhere is a waste of time. But the Interceptor's bread and butter is slicing and dicing, and man, it feels good. If you're properly spec'd, even on higher difficulties you can and will go through entire encounters without once reaching for one of your guns. The Colossus is the bigaboya, which is to say, obviously the tank javelin. Because of its size, the Colossus can't equip heavy pistols or machine pistols, but it is the only javelin that can equip autocannons and grenade launchers, and Jesus Christ, look at my damage output! The Colossus, as you'd expect, excels in both dealing and receiving damage. You do have to be careful with the damage because unlike the other classes, the Colossus's shield is something you deploy, not just something you have, and your armor doesn't regenerate on its own in any javelin. You do have the most armor, so as long as you keep an eye out and deploy your shield when necessary, you should be fine, but you don't want to get caught off guard. When I used the Colossus in the beta, I hated it. The changes it forced me to make to my playstyle to accommodate for the fact that you have no shield were irritating, and its cumbersome movement felt really stifling. Used to playing defensively, or at least in a manner that meant I could usually avoid getting hit, had left me unprepared for a javelin designed to be the center of attention. It was the javelin I decided to unlock last in the game proper, and I really wasn't looking forward to getting back to it. Obviously, the answer was that I'd clearly been playing it wrong. If you give the Colossus the weapons only it can use, if you get into a groove of pulling up your shield at just the right moment to avoid big hits, you feel like a Deathbringer. The Colossus is literally a walking tank. Its super is 3 very heavy-hitting rocket shots, though the time it stays active is criminally small considering how hard it can be to aim with all this shit in your way. And I'm almost embarrassed to share that if you equip the component that makes your sprinting shield bash do 300% more damage, often the most efficient way to clear a round of mooks is to bowl them over like a battering ram on steroids. You can become so effective with this tactic that you get the Executioner medal at the end of a match, something normally only Interceptors get because it indicates the majority of your kills were melee kills, which a shield pummel counts as. Speaking of melee, the Colossus has the only area of effect melee attack, which is particularly effective if done from the sky. But really, the shield bash is king, and it's far more satisfying to use than it has any right to be. The Colossus isn't my favorite javelin to use, but it's undeniably fun when used properly, or improperly, and it really feels like a proper tank class. The Storm is the mage javelin, as if the cloak and unnecessarily regal posing didn't give that away. The Storm is my personal favorite. While the other 3 suits are down on the ground raising their own particular kinds of hell, the Storm's place is up in the sky. All 4 suits can fly, and all 4 suits can hover, but the Storm's hovering time is dramatically increased over the other 3, and its shield is pretty useless on the ground, but far more powerful in the air. Unlike the other suits, for whom your abilities are used when necessary to supplement your gunplay or to soften up or take out larger groups, the Storm's abilities are its primary function. You can, and should, equip components that specifically boost your gear damage at the cost of your weapon damage, because coupled with equipment rolls and components that lower your ability cooldown time, and further increase your elemental damage, you become a DPS and crowd control god all the way up there. Just like an Interceptor can spend entire encounters never touching anything but their melee button, a Storm can spend entire encounters never using anything but their abilities. With the right skills equipped, you can prime and detonate your own combos. The fact that your skills are all elemental means that this alone makes the damage you can do against large groups devastating. You can also prime elemental combos for other players to detonate, which makes a Storm and an Interceptor a particularly lethal combo. Each of the other classes can prime and detonate their own combos with the right loadout, but their strengths are so focused on dealing damage in other ways that focusing on using your abilities that way is usually a less efficient way of dealing damage than shooting or slashing or bashing. The Storm's home in the sky makes its placement ideal for calling out large threats before your allies can see them, and your ability to freeze groups from up there helps with overall crowd control and can be used to get an ally out of a sticky situation. While each of the other 3 javelins has a radically different playstyle down on the ground, it's the Storm that I personally feel is the most different from anything else I've ever experienced in a game like this. Your super is an elemental DPS that primes and detonates its own combos, and does a hysterical amount of damage to both tightly packed mooks as well as solitary larger bosses. But you can't change your elevation after you've activated it, so if you triggered it just to save your own life because supers fully heal you and you're invincible while using them, then you'd better hope there's an enemy standing right in front of you, because otherwise it's just a full heal and nothing else. Not only do the suits all have radically different playstyles, but they just feel different in the way that they move, the way that they stand, and the way that they generally carry themselves. For all the ways that Destiny's class armors do a great job of differentiating their silhouettes, they're limited in the ways that they differentiate using movement. They all walk the same, they all run the same, they jump off the same. Because they're all identically sized humanoids, they all have exactly the same sense of weight. In Anthem, you can really feel the weight of these suits. Moreover, you can feel that the weight of each one is different. To ensure your entire team can stay together on missions, everyone's walking, running, and flying speeds are exactly the same. But the Colossus feels the slowest, just as the Interceptor feels the fastest. This is reinforced by the unique jumps and dodges that each suit has that really are more or less agile than each of the other suits. Each suit just has so much personality drilled into it that there's almost no way you could mistake one for another, even at a glance. The closest you'd get is mixing up a Storm and a Ranger, and it's abundantly clear which one is which once they start fighting. Even their idle animations reinforce the sense of personality that each suit gives off. Destiny's class system makes sense given its setting, and in those circumstances it's not bad that things are structured the way they are. But even in places where it would be easy to give each class a little extra touch of personality in the way that they move, the way that they carry themselves, it just isn't there. I've had some great times in Destiny, obviously more in Destiny 1 than Destiny 2, but the fact that when I get bored with a class and decide to switch, I have to redo huge swaths of the plot, the fact that the classes all end up playing more alike than different, Anthem is the clear winner here, at least for me. The sheer variety between the suits, along with the fact that you have access to all of them on a single character. It's just more fun to play, man. You don't have to make an entirely new save file to try out a different suit. You just go to the Forge and swap it out. Good job, BioWare. BioWare 4, Bungie 1. Subsection 5B. The loot system. It's not all roses, though. Allow me to be frank. Which game plays better doesn't matter too much when the rewards you get for playing are trash. I'm just gonna be completely honest here. Anthem's loot system is absolutely unadulterated fucking garbage. In Destiny, when you're above a certain level, the base tier of equipment, white, stops dropping entirely. As you continue to level up, the next tier, green, drops less and less. It never stops dropping completely, but when it does drop, because the game already knows it's useless to you except as its value in parts, it's automatically converted directly into those parts with no input required from you. This means that they never take up inventory space, instead immediately being helpfully converted into resources. Blue items, because they can be used as infusions to increase the light level of a legendary or an exotic item, remain useful for your entire playthrough and are not automatically dismantled. Legendaries are fairly common as drops, even being guaranteed as rewards for some events. Exotics are the rarest, and sometimes require specific quests to unlock, but are well worth it, being wholly unique items with wholly unique perks. I've played a lot of Destiny, and never did I feel as if the loot system was biased or poor. In fact, I definitely believe that the allocation of drops got better and better as time went on. To get an exotic heavy fusion rifle called the Sleeper Stimulant, I had to, among other things, complete a very hard version of a strike. Because this was a unique version of the strike, only other people doing this specific version would be match-made into it, unless you invited someone from your friends list. Because of its difficulty, people would frequently drop in and out after a wipe or two. The first part was the hardest, but that was the hump that took forever to get over. I worked on this strike for several hours, hoping that eventually the group would be well coordinated and tenacious enough that we could finish it without microphone support. It was incredibly frustrating, but so worth it. Even after they nerfed it, the stimulant does tons of pinpoint damage. A hard earn, but the damage output makes you really feel like you got the bang for your buck. In Anthem, once you hit the level cap of 30, common and uncommon items will stop dropping, which is a change that had to be patched in after people at the cap playing on the hardest difficulties were rightfully pissed that these useless tiers were still dropping and taking up their inventory space. Rare items have been useless to you since long before you reached level 30, but they will continue to drop nonetheless, and they are not automatically broken down into their base elements upon pickup. Instead, they take up space in your inventory, which cannot be managed in any way, shape, or form without leaving the expedition altogether. Now, I could excuse this happening on normal, and even on hard difficulty, but there are 3 difficulties above that: Grandmaster 1, Grandmaster 2, and Grandmaster 3. Each one is basically an order of magnitude more difficult than the last. Even with a perfectly outfitted and in-sync team, playing on Grandmaster 2 and especially Grandmaster 3 is a challenge, sometimes slight, sometimes bordering on impossible. The descriptions for these difficulties state outright that Masterwork and Legendary drops, basically the equivalents of Destiny's Legendaries and Exotics respectively, drop much more frequently when you're playing them. I'll just state here and now something that anyone else who's also put hundreds of hours into Anthem already knows, and which has been exhaustively documented on the subreddit. At best, that's a miscalculation. At worst, it's a fucking lie. The Anthem loot system is pathetic. I'll be honest, just writing this part of the script got me rage fired up about how badly and how deliberately BioWare fucked this up. To put things in perspective, consider this. There are bugs in the game that have been there since launch, despite numerous large patches in the interim applied both on the front and the back end. The game came out half a year ago at this point. But when BioWare accidentally broke the loot system and it started giving out Masterworks with much more frequency, basically equivalent to how Destiny gives Legendaries out, when Anthem actually had a loot system that Destiny players find to be very satisfying, guess how long it took them to fix that? They changed it back almost immediately. Anthem being more unstable than boiled jello? That's fine. That's fine. But players actually receiving the loot they want? At the rates they want? Making them want to play the game more? Bad. Terrible. Unacceptable. At launch, BioWare was being pretty open with players about what was going on and what was planned for the future. As the game has been out longer, and arguably gotten worse in more ways than it's gotten better, BioWare has eventually gone pretty much radio silent. Anytime they make contact with the player base, the refrain is the same. Fix the game, and fix the loot, because it's terrible, and the challenge of the Grandmaster difficulties is only genuinely fun if the reward doesn't feel like a fucking poke in the eye. On each of the Grandmaster difficulties, useless tier items still drop with more frequency than anything else. I've done several hour free play sessions on Grandmaster 2 wherein I got not one single masterwork. Got plenty of rares and epics though, thank God. Lord knows I can't sleep unless I have useless tier items clogging up my unmanageable inventory. Look, you don't have to make it the default. Maybe some people like getting useless items that they have to manually dismantle one by one. So just make it a toggle option. Automatically dismantle items of X rarities upon pickup, yes or no. But I'll be honest, ideally they just shouldn't drop at all. Getting epic, and worse, rare drops on Grandmaster 2 and Grandmaster 3 is honestly just unacceptable. BioWare have made minuscule changes in response to the fan backlash, but these have rightfully been met with more derision than thanks. They keep nerfing chests to make them spit out more crafting resources and less equipment, because BioWare is taking great pride in being tone-deaf and giving Anthem players the opposite of what they want. Getting embers in chests, especially event chests on Grandmaster difficulties, is about as welcome as if opening a chest just triggered a code that mailed a box of literal human shit directly to your house every time you opened one. Getting rare tier items on Grandmaster difficulties isn't just irritating, it's a fucking insult. Get a grip, BioWare. They eventually added chests to the ends of strongholds that you can open with keys that you get once a day from particular events. These chests hold cosmetic items, not including armor sets, providing you with the source for these cosmetics beyond spending in-game gold or real-life money. Cool idea, except because BioWare of course can't get anything right with the loot. You can also get javelin parts and general crafting materials from these chests, and in fact you're more likely to get those than to get any cosmetics, regardless of the difficulty you played the stronghold on. Cool job, BioWare. Newsflash! These were so universally reviled for being complete bullshit that they quietly removed these chests and the corresponding keys entirely in Update 1.1.1. Hilariously enough, while these Elysian caches were removed from the game, they weren't removed from the codex. Predictably, BioWare has basically refused to acknowledge the player base's mounting frustration with the loot, insisting that the system is fair and not broken and everyone just needs to chill out. When a big patch came out at the end of April, some of the devs did a livestream wherein the chat was immediately and consistently flooded with the word loot, while the devs refused to answer any questions that were not about level design. Interestingly enough, when they encountered a chest while playing through the new stronghold they had just added, they visibly did not want to open it. You see, the difficulty tiers and equivalent rewards are increased based not only on the difficulty you choose, but also the activity you choose. Strongholds and legendary story missions are at the very top of that list, the most difficult activities with, in theory, the highest rewards. So on the dev stream, in a stronghold, they come across a chest. They know people are pissed that the game is very stingy with masterworks and legendaries, even on the highest difficulties. It would really be a point in BioWare's favor if this chest had the quote-unquote fair distribution of masterworks and legendaries to lower tier items that they keep insisting is the reality. So what do they find when they open it? Ooh. How embarrassing for you. Absolutely heinous job, BioWare. You should be ashamed. BioWare 4, Bungie 2. Part 6. Exploration and the environment. Subsection 6A. Your inventory. So you're messing around, not really wanting to commit to any long missions, just moseying here and there in the open world, having a chill time, exploring, shooting stuff, harvesting stuff, and doing world events to taste. Who wore it better? In Destiny, assuming you bring no extra gear, you have enough inventory space to carry 81 total found items on you before you have to start disassembling things to make room. 9 each of primary weapons, secondary weapons, heavy weapons, ghost shells, helmets, gauntlets, armors, boots, and your class-specific bonus item. In practice, you'll almost never find ghost shells in the wild, and you'll find primary weapons around every corner, so the breakdown isn't as simple as 81 item slots. But the fact that you can disassemble items out in the field means it's very uncommon to run out of space and have to end your expedition solely because of that. If you have the Destiny Companion app and can transfer things to and from your vault without ever going back to a hub area, it's entirely possible that you'll never run out of inventory space during a walkabout, unless you manage to fill your vault up too. And if you're full up and miss items, they're sent to the postmaster for you to pick up later. In Anthem, because armor is cosmetic only, the items you find out in the world that take up inventory space are weapons, abilities, and components. The game gives you no indication of what your maximum backpack size is, so until you hit it for the first time, you might not even be aware that there is a limit. Well, there is, and that limit is 50. The upside is that you're not limited by pickup type, so you can have any number of guns, abilities, or cosmetics within that mix. But tough titties if you want to know what you picked up without having to go back to the fort, because despite what that very first hype video showed, items aren't revealed to you until you've left the expedition and arrived at the expedition results screen. You may think, okay, that's stupid, but at least I can see their rarities, so I can go ahead and dismantle all the ones I already know I don't want. Yeah, you would think that, wouldn't you? You gentle fool. But no. Not only does the game keep dropping beyond useless rare tier items even in the Grandmaster difficulties because there is no benevolent god in any universe, but once your inventory is clogged up with them, you have no choice but to leave and come back. But why, you might be asking, is leaving and coming back such a big deal? Oh, we'll get to that, my friend. Just you wait. So in terms of sheer inventory space, because the items you pick up aren't divided up by type, Anthem wins. But in terms of literally every other aspect of expedition inventory management, Destiny is the clear winner. Also, can I say one more time that filling up inventory space with rare items on fucking Grandmaster difficulties is unconscionable? In Destiny, useless tier items, even if they do drop, are, again, helpfully automatically broken down into parts when you pick them up. Anthem doesn't even give you that. It just throws all this bullshit into your pockets and then sews them fucking shut. And sure, you can do the Masterwork Legendary Dance to try and make sure that you don't have useless rares and epics taking up space, but what have we become? That this is what it takes to manage your own inventory. Terrible job, BioWare. BioWare 4, Bungie 3. Subsection 6B, Environmental Variety. Okay, so what about walking around in this world, managing your inventory and/or wishing there were a way to manage your inventory? How does that measure up? For starters, I'll say that in terms of world variety, Destiny wins without any argument. While Anthem's world is gorgeous, I mean look at it, it lacks any real environmental variety. There is variety, just really not that much of it. This is a limitation of the setting, I know. We're on one planet, not several, but it's a bummer all the same, and I really hope that we get a much expanded map or just as large alternate areas with different climates and layouts in upcoming updates. In Destiny, if you get tired of the greenery and ruined buildings of Earth, you can visit Nessus, the Vaporwave planetoid, or Titan, the rainy shipping container moon, or Io, the pollen spore moon, and you'll have a grand old time on any of them. You'll have a grand old time in Anthem too, as I laboriously noted in the previous sections, but even if the gameplay isn't what bores you, the environments probably will. Again, it's not that they aren't gorgeous, they are, but you can only see so much of the same color palette over and over before your eyes are begging you for a change of pace. There are tiny areas in Anthem that have a different palette from the primary forested areas, but they're teeny tiny little sections in a much larger map. And the area your first proper mission takes place in is gorgeous, but you can literally never return, so who knows what's up with that. The world is mostly greens and more greens and more greens, broken up by the occasional swamp bug pit or scar junk metal town, or admittedly gorgeous, seriously you guys, this game is so pretty, underwater area. There are a handful of indoor sections that have unique enough aesthetics, but I mean, compare this to this. Anthem's lovely, but Destiny's plenty beautiful on its own and has tons of visual variety to sweeten the pot. Good job, BioWare, but Destiny's definitely got you beat here. Your world is bigger, much bigger, but Destiny's feels bigger because it's got more variety. BioWare 4, Bungie 4. Subsection 6C, Traversal.
The design from some time in the far past.
I know I just gave Destiny the clear win in terms of environment, and it's an earned and honest win. But even with that, I do actually prefer dicking around in Anthem to dicking around in Destiny, and there are reasons for that. In Destiny, your get there faster means of traversal is via Sparrow, which is a Star Wars speeder with the serial numbers filed off. In Anthem, your get there faster means of traversal is to fly. I really cannot possibly overemphasize how much I enjoy flying. Yes, your suit slowly overheats as you maintain flight, unfortunately, but this can be mitigated in a few ways. If you fly downwards at an angle, you overheat more slowly. If you dive straight down, it actually cools you off. Though falling straight down doesn't cool you off even if you do it on purpose, because Anthem is often stupid. If it's raining, the heat bar turns blue to indicate that you're being cooled and it fills up more slowly. Flying low over water sources prevents your heat bar from filling up any further. Dunking deep into water cools you off completely, as does flying through, or near enough to, a waterfall. Once you've learned the map well enough, you can greatly extend your flying time while traveling from point A to point B by making tiny detours into waterfalls, bodies of water, or sheer drops that you know are along the way. It just feels amazing, you know? Having flight is what sets Anthem apart from any other game like it, and it's something that almost wasn't even in the game. In that first big gameplay demo video, I'll be the first person to admit that it was the flight and nothing else that sold me on giving Anthem a shot. If the trailer hadn't had that, I would have dismissed it as just another sci-fi shooter not worth my time. But if BioWare could get this right, I thought, then at least I could have fun doing this if the rest of the experience was disappointing. BioWare really messed up with Anthem in a lot of places. But this? They got this so right. Extending the game world into a vertically explorable space was a smart move. In a world full of horizontally focused shooters that get from point A to point B across linear paths, the ability to just get up and go in the most literal sense of the phrase is, as I've definitely hammered into you by this point, just fun. I mean, up until you go too high and interact with the upper barrier of the world, hitting what the lore calls the ripstream, which at best makes it impossible to see for far too many seconds, and at worst smacks you right out of the sky as if God himself had reached his fucking arm through just to push you down. But even with that annoyance, flying is a good time. It's a much more interesting and engaging way to explore a world than on foot, or even by Sparrow. Sparrows in Destiny are fun for sure, but they're not flight. Also, you don't even get access to a Sparrow in Destiny 2 until after you've beaten the main story, leaving you to sprint for minutes across long stretches of crumbling highway and yellow fields and the like. Also, a lot of the Sparrows are really ugly, but every Javelin looks cool. Good job, BioWare. BioWare 5, Bungie 4. The only place Destiny clearly without argument wins here is the fact that Destiny 2 has fast travel points that you can warp to from the map, meaning you can get from one end of the map to the other in seconds. You can choose one of several points on the map and spawn at any of them, and once you've spawned in, you can open the map again to teleport to any of these points at any time. In Anthem, for the longest time, you could choose one of several points on the map to start with and spawn at any of them. And that was it. Despite what you'd think would be an obvious functionality, you could not teleport to any of these other spawn points on the map once you've already loaded in. Not at launch in February, and not in March, and not in April. The ability to fast travel, which has been basically standard in open world games since their inception, wasn't patched into the game until May 29th, 3 months after the game came out. Before that, if you wanted to get from one end of the map to the other in a hurry, then you better cool your jets and fly there your damn self, because Anthem wasn't going to give you any other options. You could have just exited the expedition and started a new one at the other end of the map, but in that event, it would probably actually have been faster to just fly all the way there without leaving. Because if you leave, then you have to deal with... No! Not yet! We're not there yet! There's still one more section before you! Back, you demon, back! Part 7. The User Interface. Subsection 7A. The Actual UI. Well, here we are. Here is where Anthem really starts to fuck it all up, honestly. It has its flaws in every aspect I've mentioned previously, but you can work around them, or look past them for the most part. But how are you supposed to play a game without interacting with its user interface? You can't. The UI and the resulting user experience are where it all heads straight into the shitter. I'm not gonna be kind about this. Actually playing with and interacting with Anthem is a fucking mess. First off, the Anthem UI exists in a dimension composed entirely of dust, placing these floating particles of various colors all over everything. I get that it's to look dynamic or whatever, but honestly, it's a distraction at best, and an outright obstacle at worst. Everything is buried in menus, so I understand that they'd want to make them easier on the eyes, but I fail to see how immersing them in an asthmatic's nightmare was supposed to be anything even approaching a solution. I feel like I have to get out my rescue inhaler just from staring at it for too long. God, this is terrible! Whose idea was this? Turn on your location, I just want to talk. You can change the size of the subtitles, which is great, but that doesn't change the size of any of the other text in the game, so it's of limited use if you're playing on a small screen, or even a large screen that you're seated sufficiently far from. This is because the rest of the text is still tiny, and all the dust floating everywhere, putting white dots behind white words that are in size 6 font makes it significantly harder to read all this cool supplemental shit that the game is trying to give me. I read fairly quickly, so having to grind to a halt to read a word that I can't make out because it's obscured by the UI's fucking particle effects is capital B bad. Beyond that, the menus themselves are often frustratingly unresponsive. And they're ugly. Here is a simple example that I feel really helps you understand my pain. I want to invite my friend to join my squad. Because inviting people via the Expedition launch screen has never, not ever, not once worked for me, not at the start, and not after any of the updates that have happened in the interim as of the time of this recording, instead presenting me with a hollow void that insists my friends list is as empty as my bank account, I have to invite him from the touchpad menu that you can access during expeditions and from the hub area. I click the touchpad and navigate using the L1 button over to the Social tab. I do this using L1 instead of R1 because if I move through the tabs to the right rather than to the left, I'll have to pass by the forge. Why do I want to skip the forge without looking at it? We'll get to that. So I'm trying to invite my friend into my squad. I open the touchpad menu, I use L1 to avoid the forge and get to the Social tab. I hit X on either Friends or on Favorites, where I've saved him as the only person I play Anthem with. I hit X or L3 to open the Actions menu, navigate to what for some fucking reason was the last option on this menu and not the first until the update that came in August, and invite him to join. In every other video game, in all of video game history, mashing the exit button when in menus keeps exiting you out of menu after menu until you're free of them. In Anthem... Someone coded this dialog box so that instead of continuing to close, hitting exit again instead restarts the closing animation. Forever. If you keep hitting it, it keeps starting over, until you stop pressing the button and let it finish closing. Only then, Your Majesty, may I be allowed to resume mashing to exit from these hellish fucking menus. The menus kinda do whatever they want, sometimes. They go over more tabs than they should, you hit X and it doesn't do anything. And jumping off of what I said about an hour and a half ago about how the launch bay is broken, sometimes this happens? So that's cool. Anyway, these random buffs that roll on all your equipment, called inscriptions, have little icons next to them. What do they mean? Well, I have great news for you. There's a tutorial right here in your menus. And the even better news is that nowhere in the tutorials, nor anywhere else in the entire game, was any of this explained until an update at the end of April added a codex entry to explain primers and detonators. Cool of you, Anthem. A very wise decision to include no information about how your game works from within your game. Helpful. Note that, predictably, while primers and detonators are now explained, the gear icon and the person icon under your inscriptions still remain a mystery as far as the codex is concerned. As a public service, since you're here already, I'll tell you what they mean. The gear means that the listed effect only applies to the piece of equipment that it appears on. The person means that the listed effect applies to everything you have equipped. The nested circles mean that this ability primes the target for a combo detonation, and the ninja star means that this ability detonates a prime target's combo detonation. Now go forth and conquer. There's just so much stuff in this game that obliterates any suspicion that anyone bothered to think about the game's quality of life at all. Did you guys play Persona 5? I hope so. It was great. But you know what was really great in Persona 5? The user interface. Just look at this. Look how it slaps over the gameplay with style. Look how responsive and punchy it is. I mean, not every game's menus have to be an art installation, but Persona 5's UI system puts literally every other game to shame when it comes to effective presentation. Scrolling through Persona 5's menus is fun. Check this out! Slam! 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 Ah, that was nice. Oh, do I need to open a menu for something? No problem! Woo! I love menus! Right, back to Anthem. Oh, I need to open my menus for something? No problem! Oh. Nice and smooth UI, Bungie. You win by default, because your menus actually fucking work. BioWare 5, Bungie 5. Subsection 7B. The Forge. You see, the Forge used to only be accessible from the Expedition launch screen, from the launch bay, or from one of these two interactive little boxes. In all of these cases, it was behind a loading screen. BioWare got a lot of shit for this, because it was ridiculous, and now you can helpfully access the Forge from any of these places, as well as from a new tab in your menu, and all are wait-free. Except that opening the Forge, even just by scrolling by it, causes the game to want to save the changes you definitely made while quickly shuffling through your menu tabs. Usually this has no ill effects and you can go on with your day, but at least twice I've had it throw various connection errors at me because I didn't deign to linger long enough for it to save the changes that I didn't make. And in a game where waiting for things is a large part of the experience, you want to avoid giving the game any excuses to error boot you out of it, which it will otherwise do with the drop of a hat. Something else fun. You'll notice that when you enter and leave the Forge, the lighting leaves and then has to kind of come back around you. Before the big March update, the Forge was behind a load screen, both to enter and exit it. Both of these have since been removed, and that is a good thing. But because it no longer puts you back into a loading screen to reload the world around you, then when it messes up, which it will, you can see that the world removes all of its lighting while you're in it, and it has to slowly return when you leave. So now, if you happen to get pulled out of the Forge for, say, maybe a cutscene that used to be behind a Forge exit load screen but is now only behind a load the cutscene load screen, as happened to me when I was replaying the story to get footage for this video, well... Oops. Until recently, even though they added the Forge to this menu, you still couldn't access it while you were in the world, meaning you always had to leave your expedition if you wanted to change your equipment. In the big end of April update, they fucking finally added Forge functionality to expeditions, so you can change your loadout without having to leave and come back. You can't change your suit or your appearance while you're out, but this is still worlds better than it was before. Except, of course, for the fact that with every successive update, Anthem fixes one thing and subsequently breaks 3 more. So you may now sometimes find that the Forge is not accessible from your menu. It's grayed out, and there's no suit to be seen. Your tab just skips right over it. No problem, you, gentle listener, may say to yourself. I can still access the Forge from the fort by going to these things right over here. I, fool that I am, thought the same thing. If the game isn't working, trick it into working. It's the tried and true Bethesda method. Why not apply it to a BioWare game as well? But no. Our javelins, being wiser than either you or I, have up and left, and taken the kids with them. You can try hitting the switch javelin button, but they're not there either. I'm thrilled to inform you that the game is now soft-locked completely, as no inputs to exit this screen result in anything other than your increasing frustration. You have to close the game entirely to get back to playing. And at that point...
May the rats eat your eyes! I am now lost to your cause! The darkness comes! It will damn us all!
Part 8. The loading screens. What, did they think we wouldn't notice? Did they think no one would say anything? Were they under the impression that people wouldn't mind? Okay, the real answer is that Anthem's development process was an entirely predictable disaster, and that minimizing loading screens was lower on their list of priorities than making sure the game worked. Which it doesn't, but we'll get to that later. Regardless of what the reason for the excessive loading is, the fact remains that it's excessive. And trust me, I don't just mean that they're an eyesore, which they are, or that they're really, really long, which they are, or that they stand between you and nearly every single aspect of the game, which they do. I don't just mean that all of these things are a huge drain on the gameplay experience, which they are. What I mean, gentle listener, is that when combined with how completely and utterly unstable, and sometimes borderline or literally unplayable Anthem is, well, you'd better keep a book handy, because chances are you're going to be spending enough time staring at loading screens to put a big dent in whatever the latest book you got from the library is. Because Anthem is absolutely lousy with both loading screens and error issues, all the loading feels particularly egregious. You sit at a loading screen for anywhere from up to a minute or so up to a truly outrageous 3 or even 4+ minutes while loading into an event, only to discover that what you were actually loading into all that time was an error message, which means that you have to sit through all that loading again and hope it doesn't immediately happen a second, third, fourth time. Let's just for fun, let's do some comparisons. Let's compare how long it takes, including loading screens, to do some things in Anthem versus how long it takes to do those same things in Destiny. For extra fun, let's go ahead and throw both Destiny 1 and 2 into this competition, because I love creating huge amounts of unnecessary work for myself. Okay, let's go. Understand that games have to load things. I understand that when the development process of your game is less organized than indiscriminate rioting, sacrifices have to be made. I'm not angry that there are loading screens. The reason I'm angry is because when the game takes at least a minute, sometimes more than 2, to load you into an activity, a minute or 2 to load you back into the hub after immediately booting you with one of a myriad of errors, a couple minutes to load back into the activity again, sometimes even including about a minute and a half to reload into the game itself from the title screen because the error booted you all the way out entirely. If you only had, say, 30 minutes to play that night, you're now left with about 20 minutes of playing time, assuming that A, nothing else goes wrong, which it will, and B, the inventory you're given no way to manage doesn't fill up with garbage before your time is up, which would force you to spend a few more minutes in loading screens to get back into an activity, again assuming that nothing goes wrong at any point during that process. Even if the game achieves a stable state further down the line, which, sure, Jan, then the loading screens would still be obscenely long, but at least we'd be seeing them less often. Let's assume, hopefully incorrectly, that we live in a world where the loading screens will always interrupt all the things that they currently interrupt, and that they'll be around as slow to complete as they are right now. Let's look back at Destiny's loading screens. Now, as cool as it would be to be able to mess around even a little during this, these are non-interactive. You can't move your ship around at all, and none of your button inputs do anything to affect what you're seeing. But you can access your menu from here, which means that if you're fast, you can alter your loadout or mess with your options while loading into an activity. And, even cooler, sometimes you're flying over the celestial body you're landing on during the load, instead of flying through the ambiguous space void. Nice touch, Destiny. That's pretty cool. Let's look over at Anthem's loading screens then. Got anything like Destiny, bartender? No. Nope. Just these same few drawings every time. Sometimes the loading screen has to load before the loading screen loads, so you get a second to see the full drawing before the border comes in to cover most of it up. So I guess that's cool. Oh, they added some new ugly pictures for the loading screens in the big end of April update. Whoop-de-fucking-do. Oh, it looks like they did make some more drastic changes to the loading screens more recently. So now you can see even less of the stupid ugly picture than you could before, and all this negative space is more often than not used for... yeah, just a couple lines of useless bullshit text. Great, thanks. Awesome. Love it. Oh, there is this pretty cool suit-up sequence that appears only when matchmaking, and not even every time you're matchmaking, but hey, I'm into it. It's cool, it's dynamic, it's interesting to look at. What? Why did it get cut off by a loading screen? Why doesn't the game just load behind it while this plays, so that I can see the entire thing? It doesn't have to stop as soon as the game is done matchmaking. Who decided that it should... BioWare, I don't understand. You can't even just have something like this? Your javelin, flying, maybe shot from below so you only have to render the sky, heading over to the spawn point? Fine. Let's assume that any kind of dynamic, visually interesting load screen is beyond BioWare's capabilities. Which, whatever, man. Dragon Age Inquisition, another game with a huge, detailed, interesting codex, put codex entries onto the loading screens, giving you something to read while the game loaded. Interestingly enough, this is actually frustrating more often than not, because the loading screens are actually too short to read the entire thing most of the time, which means the game cuts you off in the middle of a sentence. I actually adore the idea of being able to read codex entries during loading screens, but Inquisition doesn't want me to finish any of them. This advice comes 5 years too late to help you, BioWare, but it would have been a genius move to make loading screens more palatable if you had just added a press X to continue prompt to let me finish reading the lore you propped in front of me. So Inquisition actually had the right idea. Its loading screens are just too short for a proper execution. An interesting problem, to be sure. But Anthem's loading screens are constant and interminable, and it's got loads of interesting lore in the in-game codex. So what do they give you to read during these few minutes? Great. Okay, look, it's not all bad news. BioWare did eventually change these up. They now look like this, like I'd said, and whoa, check it out! Codex entries! But alas, it still more often than not gives you these useless fucking tips, and it still hides the art you're trying to see behind all this black shit, because apparently the entire team working on loading screens shares one brain cell between them. BioWare, help me understand. Anthem was supposed to be the game that brought our faith in your ability to make good video games back. If you need super long loading screens to be a part of that game, you know what? Fine. That's fine. But why do they look like they were designed by an intern actively experiencing a fugue state? Why do your previous loading screens get to look like this, but Anthem's have to look like this? I hit the level cap months ago. Why would you think that this is useful information for me to be told? I hit the level cap months ago. Why would you think this is useful information for me to be told? Okay, you know what? I'm not a fucking graphic designer, okay? I have an English degree because I wanted to be unemployable. But okay, here's some concept art. Don't know why they're using those ugly-ass drawings instead of any of these amazing compositions. Okay, let me just futz with this a bit to make a border. Slap that border in front of it. Grab the logo. Make that shit white. Grab the Anthem logo. Get the javelin icon. Use the ink pretty bit of color. There. It's not great, but it gives you something cool to look at instead of those ugly-ass pictures that are 60% covered by black shit anyway. There's no huge-ass border covering most of it. It still moves a little to keep things dynamic. And look! Reading material. I dreamed a dream. Here, I even made a bunch of different ones to show how the colors could change depending on which art piece is pulled from the pool. You probably agree with me that this is not my specialty, and it would look better if designed by a professional. But I'd have a hard time believing that you don't think this would be better to stare at for minutes on end than this. Come on, BioWare! I'm embarrassed to be having this conversation with you. Is this really the best you could come up with? You knew that loading screens were going to be something players saw far more than they wanted, and you had to know that your game was unstable enough that it would be constantly kicking people out of what they were doing and into even more loading screens. You couldn't have just taken a minute to at least not make them an offensively poorly designed eyesore? You couldn't even have done that? Not even for me, BioWare? Do I even have to say it? Horrible job, BioWare. BioWare 5, Bungie 6. Part 9. Game Stability. Subsection 9A. General Stability. Well, we've gone from where Anthem really shines, gleaming so brightly in its successes that Destiny, retinas seared, has to retreat behind a pair of opaque sunglasses to remain in the room, to places where Destiny so clearly and so thoroughly beats out Anthem that you're almost inclined to call the police. Even before Destiny 2 came out, I was giving Destiny a lot of shit. And even while I was still enthusiastically playing Destiny 1 for several hours every day, I still gave it a lot of flack for what I personally perceived to be its critical failings. I've been giving Destiny 2 shit pretty much since it was announced, and again, even while I was actively having fun with it, I was complaining about all the things I don't like about it. But there is one thing I can say that Destiny, whether 1 or 2, has unfailingly and unflinchingly provided to me. Game stability. I've put a hefty amount of time into Destiny 1, and a respectable amount of time into Destiny 2 over the course of several years. I can remember maybe one time ever when either Destiny hard crashed me to the XMB, and I can't remember ever even once getting soft booted to the title screen because of an error. Ever. Ever! No matter how bad the internet might have been where I happened to be playing at the time. Now, obviously there are limits. No always online game can completely compensate for a terrible connection, And there were times when I was at a friend's place and the rubber banding was bad enough that I couldn't play much at all. But those were the exception rather than the rule, and the internet had to be like 5 megabytes per second bad for that to really become a problem. And even then, even on those occasions, I didn't get a connection error boot or literally any other type of error. Not ever. Not once. Anthem... Look, I'm not gonna beat around the bush about this. The first bad news I have to report is that on 2 separate occasions in my first few weeks of playing, I closed the Anthem application from the XMB, and it forced my PS4 to abruptly shut down entirely. I stopped even trying to close the game this way after the second time for over a month, instead just preferring to turn the console off entirely, even if I was just going to turn it right back on to play something else. I was unwilling to risk the damage that letting a game kill switch your PS4 can do to your console. And it turns out I was right to be concerned. One person reported that this exact set of circumstances had bricked his console. The good news is that starting his system back up in safe mode let him then boot it up normally, and there appears to have been no lasting damage. The bad news is that this even fucking happened in the first place. How do you release a game so broken that this kind of thing even happens? Now, it gets better from there, but let me be clear. What I mean by better is that the 16 million other errors I encountered did not risk permanent damage to the safety and continued operation of my PlayStation. The only danger my console faced from the rest of these problems is that I have to constantly resist the urge to fill it with firecrackers and stink bombs and mail it to Edmonton. I could narrate us through every single error and bug and issue that I came across, but I won't. Full disclosure, I originally had a section of this video that was just me screaming about not even all the errors I came across, but a huge portion of them. I cut it out of the video because it broke up the flow too much, and also, no shit, it was 20 minutes long. So, if you think this looks bad, consider that a large portion of these errors happen during the week, often in the middle of the day. If you're playing on a weekend, when you'd think BioWare would make an extra effort to ensure the game is stable, Anthem's stability is in fact exponentially worse. Destiny, whether Destiny 1 or 2, love it or hate it, you can't deny that it just works. If I experience a crash or a boot in a Destiny session, it's something I'd remember because it's so rare as to be notable. And even if you did error all the way back out to the title screen, it only takes about 35 seconds at max to get back into what you were doing. In Anthem, some sort of crash or error boot is an expected part of the experience. It's virtually guaranteed to happen to me at least once per session, but invariably it'll happen much more than once, and it's always worse immediately after an update. When getting booted out to the title screen does happen to you, and it will, you'd better hope that you weren't trying to get in a quick 20 before work, because you'll be sitting at loading screens for at least 4 to 6 minutes before you can even try playing again, hoping that it doesn't immediately happen to you a second time. And while Anthem is usually pretty good about giving you your XP and your items if it kicks you out of an expedition, sometimes it doesn't. And if you used up, say, 15 epic embers to make some consumables for a predicted-to-be-tough mission, I'm very happy to report that even if the reason you left the expedition is because the game fucked up and shat you back out at the fort or the title screen, those consumables are still considered consumed, and you just wasted all that ember. Cool, Anthem. Cool of you. And, you know, sometimes the incoming errors are obvious. If you load into an expedition and your skills are broken and your javelin has the default appearance, then when it kicks you a few seconds later and tells you there was an error loading your pilot data, well yeah, no shit. I mean, plenty of times it'll just give you 6 hours of loading screens and tell you you have a pilot data error after all that, but I guess at least that way it didn't waste your time with fake loading you into the expedition only to then immediately kick you back out. Other times, though, the error message is something really useful, like, unknown error. Cool. And you can get that in a lot of situations. Sometimes when doing nothing, sometimes when doing something. I'm excited to report that if you get a connection error while crafting a consumable, the game is now soft-locked forever because there's no way to cancel out of this besides closing the game and loading back in. Cool, Anthem, you're really killing it over here. You may think, okay, come on now, you're being uncharitable. The game came out half a year ago. Surely it's more stable now, right? Well, let's take a look. On the 16th of August, I spent just under 6 hours playing Anthem to get a bunch of B-roll footage and see if anything had changed in a way that required me to change part of the script. During those 6 hours, I encountered 3 connection error boots, 2 instances of menu lag that froze the menu and accepted no input from me for upwards of 30 seconds, and 1 hard crash that landed me all the way back at the XMB. And on the 2 occasions where I actually managed to finish an activity properly without getting errored or booted all the way out, the expedition results screen hung indefinitely until I manually skipped it. I've played Destiny on and off for years and never encountered most of these problems even once. Anthem managed to experience the full range of possible problems in fewer than 6 hours. They have had 6 months to make the game more stable. So no, I would not say that I'm being uncharitable. What the fuck, BioWare? BioWare 5, Bungie 7. Subsection 9b, Quickplay. In Anthem, there are challenges that you can do to earn stuff, gold and cosmetics mostly. After you beat the game, you get access to this one, which rewards you with, among other things, this nice edgelord paint job that you know I wanted. It asks for a not insignificant amount of your time, but this is the pre-DLC postgame, so what else are you supposed to be doing? Events are world events which you can do on your own. You come across them while wandering around in freeplay. Strongholds require a group, whether match-made or manual, but they're not really a problem. You can do contracts by yourself as well, but I thought, hey wait, contracts are sometimes what you load into during Quickplay, so if I just do Quickplay over and over, I can take off one Quickplay mission each time, and maybe knock out a handful of contracts too while I'm at it. Smart, right? Well, it would be, if Quickplay worked. Sit back, gentle listener, and I will regale you with the tale of my journey through the Quickplay system. For my very first session, I was loaded into what I knew from having already beaten the game to be one of the final steps in one of the final story quests. You eliminate a couple waves of Dominion here in this bottleneck, then the quest continues and you're supposed to fly elsewhere. 10 minutes later, I started to get the feeling that maybe this particular instance of the quest had been bugged, because Dominion kept coming and the quest never progressed. Many other players dropped in and out while I vainly hoped that eventually the game would wake up and let us continue on, but it was not to be. I started recording with the PS4 share to capture this problem, staying for another 12 minutes to ensure that it was clear to any viewers that this quest was indeed broken. When playing missions on my own, which I invariably prefer to playing with strangers, I got through the entire main story and all 3 supplemental character missions without experiencing a single mission-breaking bug. The 2 times I did experience mission-breaking bugs while playing alone were during legendary contracts, which are basically harder versions of the Radiant missions you can pick up indefinitely in the post-game. The first time, an enemy bugged into an unreachable space behind a wall, unable to be killed. The quest wouldn't progress without his death, so I forced a reload by flying away from the quest area and reloading the checkpoint. The quest proceeded normally after I re-killed all these people. The second time, the game got mad at me whenever I tried to approach where it told me the next stage of the quest was, insisting that I was leaving the mission area and teleporting me away from it over and over again. Because I didn't have anything nearby, fire or deep water or enemies, to force myself to die and respawn with, I couldn't fix this problem and had to quit the expedition and start it over. From these 2 experiences, I surmised that, in the event of a quest breaking and refusing to progress, the only way to maybe fix it is to force the game to reload from an earlier checkpoint. When playing in a group of strangers, I have no way to communicate this idea to them, so in a situation like this, your options are limited. If you die and deliberately refuse to resurrect yourself, someone else will come and resurrect you. If you refuse to resurrect your allies in the hopes that they'll get the idea, they'll resurrect themselves, and also probably get mad at you. If people leave because they realize the quest is bugged, they're immediately replaced by other people trying to get through Quickplay. Because the session is never emptied, the broken quest will remain active forever as a kind of purgatory, trapping unsuspecting freelancers merely attempting to fulfill the challenge requirements. So I leave. Maybe it was a fluke, you know? I'd gotten through literally the entire story and a mountain of strongholds with plenty of errors and crashes but no actually broken quests, so that must have been a one-time kind of thing. I load into a new Quickplay instance. Oh, what's this? Haven't seen this before. Alright, let me just... Alright, maybe if I dash? Alright, cool. Look, I don't understand what's happening. Alright, okay, so I'm assuming this means that there's a bad connection from the host? Oh my god. Alright, you know what? I'm just gonna leave. Maybe not. Can I please... Alright. Let me... Okay, thank god. Okay, bad luck twice in a row, but this is still salvageable. 3rd time's the charm, right? Oh, for fuck's sake! Are you serious? Are you really being serious with me right now, Anthem? I make one joke about purgatory and you gotta make it real? Just to be sure it was still broken, I stayed here for nearly another 10 minutes before cutting and running again. Okay. I was a little riled up after that last one, so I took a little break. Maybe it was just the servers that were overloaded or something, I don't know. We've given it a little over an hour, so let's just start up nice and fresh, and no one has to give anybody any trouble. Select Quickplay, check on my consumables that I keep wasting because they disappear when you exit or are errored out of an expedition. Let's go. Man, these loading screens really are ugly, aren't they? Let me just... That's better. You know, there are a whole lot of story missions and contracts I could get loaded into. I like the idea that I don't know what I'll be seeing next, you know? I'm not a huge fan of playing with strangers, but I can see the appeal of jumping into Quickplay and not having to decide where I'm heading or what I'm doing. It's kind of zen in a way. Oh, we're almost done loading. I wonder where we'll end up. BioWare, did I do something wrong? Have I offended you in some way? I thought we were friends, you know? I mean, maybe that was just foolishness on my part, I guess. Is it them? 'Cause, look, you know I wasn't happy when you two got married, but you promised me that it was okay. That they were okay. You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you? You wouldn't keep something like that from me, not after everything we've been through together. You and me through thick and thin, remember? I thought there were no secrets between us. Was I wrong? Did something change? I mean, you haven't been returning my calls, but I figured you were just busy, you know? Busy getting Anthem ready. Not just for me, but for all of us. So then... what is all this? What happened to you? What happened to us? What did I do wrong? Don't you love me anymore? Part 10. Denouement. Just because you enjoy something doesn't mean it should be immune from criticism, whether from you or from others. There are people who think otherwise, but let's be honest, those people are idiots. Playing something and having a good time doesn't mean that you cannot or should not criticize it. If you enjoy something, if you really like it, if you love it, you want to see it be the best thing it can be. Anthem has, I'm sorry to say but believe I've thoroughly demonstrated, a completely unacceptable ratio of things that don't work at all, and don't work as intended, to things that do work well, and do work as intended. I didn't even get into all the back-end math other people have delved into that demonstrates how fundamentally broken Anthem is, all the way down to the very bones that struggle to hold it together. Honestly, despite what you may think, considering the fact that you've been sitting here watching this video for 15 years now, I didn't even get into all the issues that I personally experienced. Yes, I'm criticizing Anthem, and I'm not doing it kindly. Why should I? I'm not some big-shot game reviewer that has to toe the corporate line because otherwise I won't get sent any more review copies. I'm just a fan. I'm one person who really wants to see BioWare succeed. If you look past the surface, if you wade through the veritable monsoon of errors and bugs and terrible quality of life decisions and horrendous UI design, BioWare's in here, somewhere. You can see it, you can feel it, you can almost touch it. When Anthem's story makes you feel something, it really makes you feel it. And when Anthem's gameplay makes you feel like a badass new god reshaping the world around you with the power of a thought, boy do you feel powerful. And when you're playing Grandmaster with one friend and two strangers, and it's all you can do to barely keep yourselves alive in the midst of a never-ending and unforgiving tsunami of things very intent on rending you limb from limb, you feel it. And you're there, right in the middle of it, perfectly in sync with your friend or your squad, or just the flow of your own intense solo expedition. You're living it, you're breathing it. Anthem has you right at the jugular, and it's everything you hoped it would be. And there it goes. Epilogue. Should you buy Anthem? No. You really shouldn't. Look, I don't regret buying it. I don't regret pre-ordering it. I don't regret participating in the closed alpha, or either of the demos, or the launch. I don't regret any of the time I've spent playing it, and I'm genuinely looking forward to what the game might someday be with proper handling in the future. I still play it today. But this? All of this? I can't, in good conscience, tell you that, in this condition, Anthem is worth $60 or $50 or even $40 or $30. Now that the price has been dropped to $20 in a desperate attempt to get people to play it, I mean, maybe. Maybe. And if you still want to get it, even after everything you've seen, it's not as if I'm gonna stop you. I want people to play Anthem. I want people to love Anthem. But I want Anthem to deserve to be loved. I really like the Anthem story. I like the characters, I like the world. I see so much potential here that to think about how great Anthem could be with the proper future care fills me with excitement. It makes my heart race, my fingers twitch. But it's not there yet. And it might never be there. Sometimes, no matter how much you want them to, things just don't work out. It pains me to say it, it really does. But honestly, you really should just buy Destiny instead. Destiny's story is stupid, and its characters are almost offensively one-dimensional, but the game works. The system works. Destiny wants to be played, so it makes it easy for you to enjoy the gameplay. Anthem's story is great, and its characters feel human, but actually playing Anthem feels as if someone's on the other side actively programming against you, trying to break things before you have too much fun. Destiny gently flows from place to place, giving you a kiss on the forehead, seeking to ease your experience along, even in the most difficult of times. Anthem stands right behind you while you play, whacking you in the back of the head with a 2x4 with increasing intensity the longer you leave it on. Anthem's story and characters are better, but you don't buy a game like this, a live service game, for the story. You buy it to play. And you can't play Anthem. If the story is the best part because the game itself borders on literally unusable, well, could've just read the book, couldn't you? Actually, fuck that. You know what? You should really just buy Sea of Thieves. The story is literally non-existent, but look, you want gorgeous landscapes? Check out this fucking ocean. You want minimal choice over what your character looks like? Check out this 100% randomized nonsense. And unlike Anthem, which feels as if you're fighting against it to even try having a good time, Sea of Thieves just works. Well, usually. But when it doesn't work, it's more hilarious than game-breakingly frustrating. And honestly, it's all just so chill. Hanging out in the open seas, just you and maybe a pal, minding your own business. It's honestly kind of therapeutic how relaxing Sea of Thieves can be when you're not being chased down by players who don't know how to mind their own fucking business. It's very zen. Virtually no stressors to be found. I could take a nap out on this ocean. Right, look. If BioWare manages to really fix Anthem, I mean really fix it, then I'll turn around and tell everyone I know to get a copy, just like I was doing while high off the rush that playing the closed alpha gave me. And if anyone who doesn't already own Anthem decides to buy it after watching this far too long video, even though I explicitly ended it by telling you not to do that, well, I'll see you out in Bastion then, yeah? Maybe Anthem will eventually get to a place where it's earned the faith you and I are putting into it. To be honest, especially now, I doubt it ever will. But I certainly hope it does. Well,